Saito is a spineless bum who accidentally gets summoned by an arrogant witch who mistreats him because he's weak. However, everything changes when he unlocks the ability to master any weapon he chooses, so he starts cracking her enemies by day and breaking her back by night. It all begins in another world where a budget Hogwarts starts its new session. There, a professor teaches the students about earth magic and asks for a volunteer to try a simple spell. Just then, an ugly pink-haired girl named Louise volunteers as tribute, but the rest of the class is terrified and begging her not to do it. However, Louise arrogantly insists that she can handle it and then proceeds to blow up the entire class with her attempt. Everyone immediately rails on her for constantly getting spells wrong and being a failure, but Louise proudly brushes it off and leaves. Later, Louise runs into a girl named Kerche and her squad of mean girls, who mock her for being completely worthless. However, Louise insists that she was simply having a bad day and intends to show her true power during the summoning ritual. The next day, the students gather outside and are taught that the summoning ritual will bring forth familiars that they'll spend the rest of their lives with. At this, the students start summoning all kinds of weird creatures that are all finer than your girlfriend, while Louise tries to hide away. When everyone else is done, Kerche points out that Louise is the last person, so everyone gathers around to see what new kind of disaster awaits them. Determined to prove them wrong, Louise puts her bendy back into summoning a divine and powerful familiar, which ends up causing yet another explosion. However, when the smoke clears, everyone is shocked to see Saito on the floor, and they immediately start mocking Louise for summoning a peasant. Saito wakes up confused and unable to understand their language, but when he tries to speak, Louise shuts him up. She quickly asks the instructor if she can try again, but the man tells her it's impossible, meaning she's stuck with that ugly twig for the rest of her life. With no other choice, Louise approaches Saito and kisses him on the lips to seal their familiar contract. Saito's body then begins to react, but apart from the bulge in his pants, he gets branded with a strange mark, causing him to pass out. Later, Saito wakes up in Louise's room and finds her taking off her clothes and thinks he's about to get some. Unfortunately, Louise shoves them at him and demands he do her laundry since it's the least a useless peasant can do. Saito starts to protest, but since they can't understand each other, Louise tries a spell to silence him, but it goes wrong and explodes. Thankfully, this somehow makes Saito able to speak the same language, so Louise can finally explain that Saito has been summoned and is now basically a handbag. Louise then starts to lament about how horrible the situation is for her, but when she opens her eyes, she finds that Saito has made a run for it. On the way, Saito runs past a hot babe and a rizzler named Geach, who wonders what's going on until Louise catches up and begs him to help her catch her useless familiar. Saito barely makes it outside when he suddenly starts levitating thanks to Geach's spell to capture him. At this, Saito realizes magic really exists here, which means he's in another world. Afterwards, Saito is chained up as he attempts to explain that he's from Earth and demands to be sent back, but Louise refuses. Suddenly, she starts undressing and tossing her clothes on Saito, while explaining that their contract can't be reversed. Surprised, Saito asks if she's about to give him a tease. Still, Louise puts out the lights and says she's off to bed. When she takes off everything else, Saito covers his face and reminds her that he's a guy. Still, she says he's just a familiar spirit who can't deliver strokes and tosses her unmentionables on him, telling him to wash them. When Saito checks it out and refuses, Louise threatens to starve him to death, so he sleeps on the floor. In the morning, Saito wakes Louise by throwing her washed clothes on her, and when she asks about her fanny flappers, Saito tells her to get them herself. So, Louise threatens to make him skip breakfast and orders him to get her a new one from her drawers. Afterwards, Saito asks Louise to unlock his chains, but she tosses her clothes at him and asks him to dress her up. When he refuses, Loya states that aristocrats don't dress themselves when they have servants and threatens to starve him. So dresses her up, and she unlocks his chain while he gets swoony, seeing her from up close. Shortly after, at the dining hall, they arrive at Louise's seat, and Saito freaks out at the sight of the served food. Just when he tries to sit on the chair next to her, Louise points to a plate on the floor and orders him to sit on the floor, since only aristocrats get to sit on chairs. Saito then sits like a good pup and eats what is served. After breakfast, Louise tells Saito to be grateful since familiars are usually left outside during meals, and he responds, saying he would have preferred that. Just then, some students are cuddling their familiars, so Saito asks what they're doing. In response, Louise explains that they're bonding with their familiars, and just then, Kerche shows up with her salamander, which scares Saito to bits, so he tells Kerche to keep it on a leash. However, Kerche says that her familiar spirit is obedient, unlike him. This gets Louise pissed, so she tells Kerche to mind her business, but Kerche accuses her of bringing a plebeian to pretend to be her familiar. In response, Louise says she did the summoning properly, while Kerche states that they make the perfect match. After Kerche leaves, Louise gets furious and orders Saito to get her some tea. On his way, he gets scared by a creepy familiar, so he bumps into Siesta, a maid serving cake. He then quickly picks it and puts it back on her plate while Siesta identifies him as Louise's plebeian familiar. Saito then says he doesn't understand the segregation in their world, so Siesta explains that people who can use magic are aristocrats, while the others are plebeians. On hearing this, Saito-ha asks if she's an aristocrat, but Siesta introduces herself, adding that she's just a maid on campus. Just when Saito tells her his name, Geach calls Siesta, asking for his cake, so Saito takes the plate from her and offers to deliver it to Geach. Meanwhile, Geach is busy rizzing Mont to a stupor, so Saito serves the cake, and as he leaves, Mont comments that she heard rumors about Geach dating a junior. Quickly, Geach tries to debunk this, but Saito comments that he saw Geach begging to suck Katie's toe the previous night. Annoyed, Geach tells him to get lost, while Mont starts questioning Geach. To make matters worse, Saito bumps into the junior on his way out and points her to Geach. When Katie runs up to meet Geach and offers him some homemade snacks, Mont gets furious while Geach tries to explain. Suddenly, other students gather to watch as the ladies get mad, and Mont slaps the lights out of Geach. While everyone laughs at him, Geach decides to teach Saito a lesson, so he whips out his wand and challenges him to a duel. Just then, Louise shows up looking pissed and drags Saito along while talking some sense into him. Curious, Saito asks where they're headed, and Louise says he must apologize to Geach. So he halts and says he'd die before he apologizes, annoying Louise, who then says he won't last a second in a duel with an aristocrat. Sometime later, Geach and Saito meet for their duel, and Louise tries to discourage them. However, Geach asks if she's falling for her lame familiar, and she denies it, saying she's only worried that he'll get beaten into a pulp. Ignoring this, Geach swings his wand and summons a bronze golem to beat Saito up. Meanwhile, at the principal's office, Colbert reports to Osmond that he researched the rune on Saito, since it's unfamiliar, and discovered something interesting. Hearing this, Osmond asks Long to excuse them, and when she's gone, Colbert reveals that the rune only appears on a legendary familiar spirit. In response, Osmond claims that the situation is deeper than it seems, and tells Colbert to keep it a secret. On the fields, Saito takes his beating like a champ and keeps getting back up to prove that he's not a chump like you. After a while, Louise interferes on seeing Saito's rearranged face and tells them to stop, while commending Saito for fighting. However, Saito gets back up to continue fighting, so Geach summons a sword for him to make things fair. Just when Saito goes for the sword, Louise stops him and warns him that things will get brutal once he picks up the sword, but Saito ignores her and grabs the sword. Suddenly, his runes glow, and when the golem charges at him, he cuts it down in one swing, surprising everyone. Seeing this, Geach summons more golems, but Saito defeats them all in seconds and threatens him to his knees with the sword. Shocked by this, Geach gives up, and Louise rushes over to ask Saito if he's alright, but immediately, he drops the sword, and he passes out. Some days later, Saito wakes up bandaged all over, and Siesta walks in, saying he's been out for 3 days. He then asks why she showed up, and Siesta reveals that Louise ordered her to bring him some food. Just then, Saito spots Louise sleeping on a chair nearby while Siesta states that she's been taking care of him while he's out. Sometime later, Saito laments while washing Louise's unmentionables and recalls how she told him that she piled them up while he slept after his duel. Some moments later, Louise finds him gawking at some ladies and scolds him. She then tells him to finish up with the laundry and join her in class. Meanwhile, Kerche steps out with Tabitha and eyes Saito like the last cookie in a jar. Later in class, while the teacher lectures, Mont rises to make a contribution, so Saito turns to check her out, but Louise crushes his berries with her heels. After this, when the teacher assumes that most of them can only use at least one element, Kerche rises to comment that there's someone with a 0% chance of using one element, making everyone focus on Louise. When they leave the class, Saito tells Louise that he finally understands why everyone calls her Zero Louise and starts making fun of her. Annoyed by this, Louise declares that he won't be fed till further notice, so Saito begs her to reconsider, but she insists on her decision. Later at night, Saito's stomach growls loudly, but Louise says that even though he skipped lunch and dinner, he won't be getting any meal anytime soon. While he helps her dress for bed, he starts weeping, so she agrees to let him off the hook. Excited, Saito thanks her and says he'll never call her Zero again, even though she's got zero-sized chesticles. On hearing this, Louise gets furious and decides to kick him out for the night. While he shivers on the floor outside, Siesta finds him and takes him to the kitchen, where he feasts on leftovers provided by Marto, the chef, who then calls him their sword. Surprised, Saito asks what he means by that, and Marto explains that the plebeians are proud of him for beating up a snobby aristocrat. Hearing this, Saito says that he only grabbed the sword and his body reacted, but Marto thinks he's just being modest. A few moments later, while Siesta walks Saito off, She comments that the plebeians are now his fans, and Saito says he now has something to live for. He then chips in that he thought it was over for him after the duel, but Siesta reveals that he would have died if Louise hadn't ordered an expensive potion that healed him. Afterwards, Siesta says that she'd like to talk with him some other time, so the idiot blushes and agrees to hang out with her some other time. On his way back to the dorm, Kerche's Salamana abducts him and drops him in her room, where he finds the hoe waiting. She then reveals that she fell for him the moment he defeated Guiche. So when she leans in for a kiss, her sneaky link shows up at her window for an after-hours appointment. Just then, Kerche suggests they meet later, but since the simp starts protesting, she blows him off with a fire spell. Curious, Saito asks who the dude is, so Kerche says it's one of her friends and adds that Saito is the love of her life. After this, she leans in again but gets interrupted by 3 idiots, accusing Kerche of lying about her relationship status. So, Kerche blows them off and straddles Saito while confessing her love for him. However, Saito says that he has some business to take care of. Ignoring this, Kerche kisses him, and Louise suddenly barges in on them. She then asks Saito to follow her, but Kerche protests, saying that Saito might be her familiar spirit, but he's also human. After this, she squeezes his head between her gigantic melons, so the idiot agrees with her. Unsurprised, Louise reveals that he'll get himself into the crosshairs of some jealous aristocrats the next day. On hearing this, Saito breaks free from Kerche's grip, while Louise pulls him out by his ear. On getting to the room, she pulls out a whip and starts flogging him. But Saito grabs her hand and says she's probably jealous because he's not piping her like he's doing to Kerche. Louise then smashes his family jewels and steps on him, stating that he can clap a monkey if he wants, but she won't let him simp for Kerche, whose family is enemies with hers. Afterwards, Saito narrates how he got kidnapped and says he was helpless, but Louise comments that he's a pathetic swordsman. In response, Saito says that the duel was his first time wielding a sword. Surprised, Louise says that familiar spirits sometimes gain special abilities after making a contract with their master. When she cites a talking cat as an example, Saito feels disrespected and says he can't be a swordsman without a sword. After this, Louise tells Saito to go to bed, but as he heads out, she tells him to sleep in the room. However, Saito stands there, thinking she really wants to munch on his carrot. On realizing this, Louise gets furious and whips him again. The next day, while Kerche thinks of how to get Saito for herself, she spots Louise riding out on a horse with Saito and gets an idea. So she heads to Tabitha's room to convince Tabitha to give her a ride on her sylphid. A few moments later, Louise and Saito arrive at a weapons shop where they check out a sword and request a broader one. Just then, the store owner goes in to find one and decides to rip them off. Meanwhile, Saito asks Louise if she's getting the sword for him. In response, Louise explains that he needs it to protect himself from Kerche. Just then, the store owner shows up with a dazzling sword and yaps about it being the best. After trying to buy it for less, the store owner brings out a rusty-looking sword and says it's what they can afford. So Louise decides to buy it, surprising Saito. Later that day, Kirky gifts Saito with the dazzling sword, and while Saito fawns all over it, Louise asks Kirky if she followed them. While Kerche brags about being able to afford the sword, Tabitha recalls how she fried the store owner's brains with her melons and thighs and got a huge discount. Suddenly, things start getting heated up between Kerche and Louise, but Tabitha rids them of their wands. So the ladies approach Saito and ask him to choose between them. In response, Saito asks if he could keep both swords, and the ladies knock him out. After the ladies resume their squabble, a voice suddenly tells them to shut up, surprising them as they think it's Saito. However, when he says that he didn't say anything, Tabitha points out that it's the cheap sword. While they all marvel at this, the sword introduces itself as Del. Some days later, Osmond writes a letter and hands it over to a count named Mott, who then thanks the Academy for its cooperation. In response, Osmond says that they have no choice since it's a direct order from the royal palace. On his way out, Mott sees Long at the door and asks her out to dinner, and she agrees. Afterwards, she heads into the office and asks Osmond what's going on. And in response, Osmond explains that they've just been warned about a mage thief named Fouquet, who has been stealing valuables from aristocrats. He then reveals that the Academy is keeping a staff of destruction in their special treasure vault at the request of the royal palace because it is protected by spells. Later, while Saito does the laundry at night, Siesta shows up and startles him. She then helps him out with the laundry, so he thanks her and says he never did laundry by hand until he got to their world. Curious, Siesta asks where he's from, and Saito says it's a place far away. Just then, Siesta thanks him for fighting the aristocrat and inspiring her before bidding him goodnight. On his way back to the room, Kerche steps out of her room, so he freaks out and gives an excuse while walking quickly back to the room. Kerche then lures him in with her Grand Canyon and suggests they talk in her room. Shortly after, while admiring the sword she got him, Saito asks Kirche why she's into him when she has countless other guys dying to lick her toes. In response, Kirche says it's because he's built differently. However, when she mentions everything that sucks about him, he returns the sword and heads out. But Kirche opens up a box and offers him everything, from a talisman ring to an heirloom book. When Saito refuses all of them, Kirche decides to do it the violent way. Suddenly, Louise barges in on them again and tells Saito to follow her. On getting to the room, she scolds Saito for being incredibly dumb. In his defense, Saito says he was lured by the shiny sword, so Louise takes out her whip and whips him till daybreak. The next day, Siesta packs up and leaves the academy on a carriage, while somewhere else, Louise declares that Saito must now stay outside with the other familiars, since he won't stop thinking with his pecker. Shortly after, the other familiar freaks Saito out, so he takes a walk and runs into Marto, who then invites him to the kitchen. On getting there, he gets fed on leftovers and asks about Siesta, but Marto reveals that she quit to go serve Mott. Surprised, Saito asks why she left suddenly, and Marto reveals that plebeians have no choice but to listen to aristocrats. Later, Saito asks Louise about Mott, and she explains that he's a cocky messenger from the palace, while Del chips in that Siesta is about to become Mott's mistress. When Louise confirms this, Saito worries about Siesta, so he approaches Geach to ask for help. During lunch, Louise gets mad since Saito doesn't show up, and Kirche shows up offering to give him her food. Annoyed, Loyas warns Kirche not to feed her familiar without her permission, and just then, they wonder where he is. Geach then overhears this and reveals that Saito asked him for directions to Mott's estate. Meanwhile, when Saito arrives at the estate, thinking he's in stealth mode, a guard approaches him and asks who he is. At the time, Mott is prepping to devour Siesta's cookie, but he gets interrupted by guards who then bring in Saito to see him. After Saito presents his case, Mott tells him to get lost, but Saito offers to do anything to have Siesta return to the academy. Curious, Mott asks if he's her boyfriend, and Saito says they're just co-workers. He then asks Mott if it's true that Siesta will become his mistress, and Mott confirms that he can do whatever he pleases with her. Suddenly, Saito gets mad, but the guards stop him. This annoys Mott, who then gets a club to reset his brain, but Siesta shows up to beg on his behalf. So, since Saito offered to do anything, Mott reveals that he collects books for fun and adds that he seeks a book mistakenly summoned by a mage, when he reveals that it's an heirloom of a family whose daughter is now at the academy. On hearing the family name, Saito realizes it's Kirche, so he hurries back to the academy and runs into Louise on the way. Later at the dorm, while he dresses her for bed, Louise warns Saito that Mott is not a wimp like Geach, so she tells him to give up on Siesta and go to bed. However, Saito sneaks out and heads to Kirche's room to request the book. Just then, she takes it out and says that although she's not interested in the book, she hears that it turns people on. Saito then realizes why Mott wants it while Kirche dazes Saito with her buns. She then offers to give him the book and grabs him while saying he has to glaze her buns to get it. Annoyed, Saito leaves the room angry, and Tabitha sees him riding out on a horse. Shortly after, Tabitha and Kirche wake Louise up to inform her that her familiar is on his way to the estate with a sword. Meanwhile, at Mott's estate, while Siesta preps to get cracked by Mott, Saito sneaks in, but gets busted again. So, the guards take him to see Mott, who then asks why he's carrying a sword. Suddenly, Saito draws his sword, and the guards prepare to protect Mott. On their way to the estate, Kirche points out that Saito will be slain on the spot if he draws his sword to attack an aristocrat, and adds that Louise might be implicated. While the ladies prepare to land, Saito wonders why his superpowers ghosted him and starts shivering. So, Mott breaks a water vase and starts attacking him with a water spell. Luckily, Louise shows up in time to stop an ice knife from piercing through his skull. Afterward, Louise apologizes and offers to take any punishment, but Mott states that her familiar committed a crime and advises her to get her family involved. When Saito almost starts running his stinky mouth, Kirche stops him and offers Mott the heirloom. While Mott gets excited about the book, Saito demands that he return Siesta, so Mott orders Siesta's release. But when Mott opens the book, Saito realizes it's an after-hours jizzing material from his previous world. When they return to the academy, Siesta thanks Saito with a kiss and runs off. After this, Louise ignores him and heads back to the dorm, so he apologizes, but she announces that she'll starve him to death as punishment. Sometime later, Louise trains Saito to march on a spot and gives up when she realizes how untalented her familiar is. Curious, Saito asks why she's complaining all of a sudden, and Louise says that she forgot about an exhibition where familiar spirits show off their skills. Saito then tells her not to participate, but Louise says it's compulsory for second years. When she laments about his lack of talent, Saito suggests he show off his skills by washing her unmentionables. Immediately, Louise gets her whip and tries to teach him a lesson, but Saito suddenly bumps into his sword. Just then, Louise figures he could perform with the sword, but Saito points out that he was shivering when he tried fighting at Mat's estate. Louise then states that it's strange since she was meant to be punished for Saito's foolery, but nothing happened. After this, she tells Saito to think of something to do before the end of class. So Saito spends most of his day embarrassing himself in the name of practice. When he gives up, he asks Del if he knows some tricks, but Del says it's only for combat use. Just then, Siesta shows up, asking Saito what he's doing, and Saito suddenly remembers the kiss, so he freaks out. She then asks if he's practicing for the exhibition, and Saito asks how she knows. In response, Siesta explains that the students are training hard, since Henrietta, the princess, will be at the event. At Osmond's office, while Long gives her report about preparations for the exhibition, the old creep checks out what color she's wearing using his familiar. On realizing this, Long tries to crush the little rat, but it escapes and returns to Osmond. Later, while Colbert assigns some guards to guard the gate on the day of the event, Long asks why he's reassigning guards from the treasure vault to the gate when Fouquet is after the treasure. In response, Colbert says they're short on people and adds that no one is crazy enough to attack while the princess's guards are around. On the day before the event, Henrietta arrives in her carriage, and while the people cheer for her, Kercha points out that she looks prettier than the princess. Meanwhile, Saito compliments the princess's beauty, but Louise shuts him up. Later that day, while Saito shows Louise his F-tier swordsmanship, she prepares to unalive him with her whip. Luckily, someone knocks, so Saito hurries to get the door, and a hooded lady walks in. On realizing that it's Henrietta, the ladies hug each other since they're childhood friends. They used to play together and once made a promise to be there for each other when things go south. So, Louise gets on her knees, but Henrietta tells her to cut out the formalities. Just then, Henrietta laments about how she's been lonely since her father's passing, but Saito interrupts and says that he now realizes that Louise has been breathing down his neck just to impress her princess friend. Annoyed, Louise slams his head into the ground, forcing him to show some respect. However, when Henrietta says it's okay, Saito stares at her and realizes she's just his type. Louise then slams his head into the ground again and apologizes on his behalf. Henrietta then points out that she's been longing to meet him since he stood up to Mott. When Louise marvels at this, Henrietta explains that there was a little commotion at the palace about the issue and assures her that she took care of it. She then reminds Louise of their promise and comments that she summoned a good familiar, but Louise disagrees. When she's leaving, Henrietta wishes Saito good luck, but the idiot gets cocky, so Louise uses her whip on him while Henrietta watches the chaos. On the day of the exhibition, every other student put up a good show with their familiars, and while they watch, Louise tells Saito to simply bow and leave the stage. But Saito says he's practiced too much to do just that. While they argue, they get called on stage, so Louise introduces herself in Saito's class, amusing the audience. Just when her classmates start teasing her from the audience, Saito shuts them up and tells them to watch. But before he does anything, he slips and falls on the stage, making everyone laugh. Before he embarrasses her any further, Louise pulls him off the stage. Meanwhile, Fouquet tries to break the vault lock, but realizes that it's mission impossible. So she heads out and summons a golem to break into the vault, but realizes that it's protected by spells. Coincidentally, Louise and Saito arrive on the scene and marvel at the sight of a golem. Just then, the golem tries to grab them, but Saito pushes Louise away and gets picked up. To rescue him, Louise casts a fireball spell, but ends up hitting the vault. Just when Fouquet talks down on her spell, she spots the vault wall cracking and punches a hole through. At the same time, Tabitha gets announced as the winner at the exhibition, and Henrietta asks her to fly again with her sylphid. Just then, the environment gets rocked by the impact of the golem's punch, so Tabitha flies to check it out and spots Fouquet leaving with the Staff of Destruction. When the golem drops Saito, she quickly flies to the scene and catches him while Fouquet escapes on the golem. Afterwards, Osmond reads a letter left behind by Fouquet, stating what she stole, and wonders how she broke into the vault. Meanwhile, Kercha asks Tabitha if she saw her face, but Tabitha says it was covered. Just then, Henrietta arrives on the scene and says she's glad that Saito and Louise are safe. Louise then apologizes for letting Fouquet get away, but Henrietta says it's not her responsibility to catch Fouquet. When Henrietta bids them farewell and leaves in a carriage, Louise says she hopes Henrietta doesn't take the fall. Saito then says it's absurd, while Louise states that she heard some bad rumors about the palace. Just then, Saito asks her why she didn't run when the golem caught him, and she responds, saying that a mage who abandons his familiar is not a mage. Sometime later, Kercha feeds Saito in class, and after a while, Louise loses it, telling her to stay away from her familiar. While Louise deals with Saito, Kercha points out that their teachers are busy dealing with the thief's mess. Just then, Loyos overhears Kerche saying that the princess might take the fall, since the guards were occupied with protecting her when Fouquet broke in. Just then, a teacher announces that Louise and Tabitha are being summoned to the principal's office. On getting there, Lois asks Kerche why she tagged along, and she responds, saying things might get interesting. Just then, Long comments that she got some information about a sus figure frequenting an abandoned house in the forest and hands a sketch showing the person to Osmond. So, Osmond shows it to the ladies, and Louise confirms that it's Fouquet. On hearing this, Colbert suggests they notify the royal palace and let the knights handle it, but Osmond says that Fouquet will get away. He then declares that they'll recover the Staff of Destruction and asks for volunteers. After a brief silence, Louise raises her hands, followed by Kerche, who then says she can't lose to Louise. When Tabitha volunteers too, Osmond comments that she is a knight who's also a chevalier, surprising the other ladies. After this, Osmond explains that Kerche is from a famous military family, while Louise is a nuthead with nothing but a bright future. Suddenly, he recalls that she has a familiar who once defeated an aristocrat and says that the academy is banking on them. Just then, Long offers to accompany them as a guide. On their way out of the academy, Saito asks why an aristocrat like Fouquet steals, but Long explains that not all mages are aristocrats, since some choose to be plebeians for personal reasons. In addition, she reveals that she was once an aristocrat too, so when Kerche comments that she's Osmond's secretary, Long explains that Osmond doesn't mind. Just then, Kerche starts questioning Long about how she lost her title, but Louise says she's being rude. After this, she sits beside Saito, saying she joined the mission because of him. Facing Louise, Kerche asks what she'd do if the golem appears again, and when she says she'll attack it with her magic, Kerche says she's a joker. Afterwards, Kerche hands over the shiny sword to Saito, but he says he has a sword. Kerche then says that the cheap sword can't cut anything in an emergency. He then agrees with her and glances at Louise, who then tells him to suit himself while she gets more furious. Shortly after, they arrive at the house, and when Saito checks it out, he announces that there's no one there. Afterwards, Tabitha scans the house and states that there are no traps, so they head in. Louise chooses to stay outside, and Long decides to scout the surroundings. On checking out the house, Tabitha finds the Staff of Destruction, making the other freak out. Suddenly, they hear Louise scream outside, and almost immediately, Fouquet's golem rips open the roof of the house. Tabitha then attacks it with a wind spell, which does nothing, while Kerche attacks next with a flame spell, but the golem dusts it off, like it's nothing. Just then, Louise casts a spell to attack the golem, but ends up drawing its attention to herself. Seeing this, Saito tells her to run, but she tries to play hero, so the golem tries to crush her, but Saito rushes in to save her. Despite this, Louise tells him to get out of her way, so he resets her and says that her death will be pointless. So, Louise tears up and says people will make fun of her if she runs away. While he tries to console her, the golem attacks again, but Saito gets her away and hands her over to the other ladies. When Kerche tells Saito to get on the sylphid, too, he tells them to leave and draws the shiny sword. Suddenly, he charges towards the golem and jumps to attack, but to his surprise, the shiny sword breaks in half. Just then, Del tells Saito to use it if he wants to live, and while the golem raises its arm to attack again, Saito draws the rusty sword, and his runes suddenly glow. He then evades the attack and cuts down the golem's legs first. However, the golem repairs its broken legs, so while Saito thinks of what to do next, Louise grabs the Staff of Destruction and jumps off the flying sylphid. While she descends on the golem and tries to clobber the golem to death, Saito realizes that the Staff of Destruction is actually a rocket launcher, so he runs towards her and snatches the weapon from her. Quickly, he sets up the launcher and blows off the golem's head while getting Louise to safety. As the golem crumbles, Kerche suddenly hugs him while Saito asks about Fuki. While they look around for her, Long shows up and picks up the bazooka while commending the students. Curious, Louise asks Long where she was all along, and she responds, saying that the Staff of Destruction is impressive for reducing her golem to dust and dirt. On hearing this, the students realize that she's Fouquet. Just as Saito reaches for his sword, Long tells him to stop, and explains that she didn't know how to use the staff after stealing it, so she brought them, hoping they'll use it. After saying she was initially disappointed when students followed her instead of teachers, she reveals that she thought Saito might pull it off, since he's Gandalf. Just then, she bids them farewell and clicks the trigger, but is surprised when nothing happens. Suddenly, Saito knocks her out cold, explaining that the weapon has a single shot and revealing that it's a weapon from his world. Back at the academy, Osmond commends the students and reveals that Long has been arrested. He then adds that they'll get rewards from the royal family, except Saito, since he's not an aristocrat. Saito then says he doesn't need a reward and reveals that he has some questions. After the ladies leave, Saito points out that the bazooka was from his world and asks how they got it. In response, Osman explains that it's a gift from a wounded soldier who appeared in their world many years ago. After Osman took care of the man, he eventually died, so Osman couldn't figure out where he was from. Disappointed, Saito says he thought he had found his way back home. Later that night at a ball, while the students chatter, Saito cults outside. Just then, Louise shows up looking pang and ignores every boy asking to dance with her. When she meets Saito, the music comes on, so she asks him to dance with her. While they dance, Lois says she believes that he came from another world after he used the Staff of Destruction. After this, she thanks Saito for saving her, while he says she's acting weird. Afterwards, Henrietta grants Louise the Chevalier title, and when she thanks her, Henrietta faces Saito and thanks him too. She then offers her hand for him to kiss, but Louise tells Henrietta not to touch a stinky familiar like hers. Meanwhile, Saito stares at the hand like it's got extra fingers, and asks why he's being treated like a dog, so Louise tells him to kiss the princess. Hearing this, Saito freaks out and suddenly pulls Henrietta close to kiss her on her lips. Shocked, Henrietta almost passes out while Lou screams out her lungs. After reconstructing his face, Louise slams Saito's head into the ground and tells him to apologize, but Saito protests, saying she asked him to kiss the princess. Louise then calls him a fool for kissing her lips and hits him with a knockout punch. After this, Henrietta requests that they both live in town for a short time. Some days later, Louise steps out dressed like a commoner and complains about how lame she looks. In response, Saito says it was her idea to dress like a plebeian, and when she thinks of changing into something flashy, Saito asks if she understands what their mission is. Some days before this, Henrietta had handed them a mission to spy on the town, since she had heard rumors of aristocrats oppressing plebeians. So she asked them to investigate secretly, and Louise gladly took the mission. Back in real time, Saito asks what they'll do next, and Louise suggests they get a horse. However, when they realize they can't afford one, they head to a hotel next. On getting there, they realize they can't afford a room either, so Saito suggests they get a cheaper hotel, but Louise says a diva can't sleep in cheap rooms. Saito then comments that the mission might be impossible for an aristocratic lady. This annoys Louise, so she says she can manage on her own and walks away. Later, Saito finds her sulking, and she reveals that she blew everything they have at the casino. Hearing this, Saito says it's why she should never be alone, but Louise shuts him up to think. When Saito suggests they apologize and ask Henrietta for more money, Louise says she must have funded the mission from her own pockets. Just when Saito complains about being hungry, a backdoor specialist shows up and starts fawning over him. After this, he introduces himself as Scarin and adds that he runs an inn down the road. He then offers to take them in on the condition that they'll work for him. On getting to the inn, Scarin gathers his waitresses and announces that a new friend will be joining them. So he calls on Louise, who then steps out dressed like a community property while he explains that she's on the run with her brother. Meanwhile, Saito watches her from the kitchen, and then a lady calls him to help her with the dishes. While they work, she then compliments Louise's look and introduces herself as Jessica. After Saito introduces himself, Jessica tells him to ask her about anything, while he laughs like an idiot. Watching this, Louise gets pissed while Scarin announces that there'll be a tip race where the most tipped employee gets an enchanted fairy bustier that charms men. He then tells everyone to work hard for the bustier, and Louise gets ready to do her best. Later that day, Louise drops a bottle of wine on a customer's table, and the customer requests that she pour it, so she fills up the cup till it overflows on the customer. Just then, the customer realizes she's a cutie with many saucers, so he offers her his cup and tells her to fill it again. While she talks some sense into the customer, Scarin shows up to calm him down while explaining that Louise is a newbie. The next day, another customer makes a rude comment about Louise, and she breaks a bottle of wine on his bald head. Meanwhile, Saito chats with Jessica and realizes that she's Sakrin's daughter. Shocked by this, Saito breaks a dish and wonders how a girl like her could be his daughter. Meanwhile, Louise apologizes to Scarin for sending customers to the hospital and wonders why they won't stop body-shaming her. Just then, she checks out the sizes of Jessica's tatas and realizes it must be why Saito looks happier on the job. So she throws a bottle at him, knocking him out. A short while later, Saito wakes up, and Jessica says she can tell that Saito and Louise are not siblings. When she asks Saito if Louise is an aristocrat, Saito freaks out, confirming Jessica's guess. So she explains that everything about Louise is giving aristocrat and guesses that he must be her servant. In response, Saito says he's not and advises her to stay away from them. Suddenly, Jessica asks if they're on a mission and tells Saito to tell her stories. When he hesitates, Jessica puts his hands between her bloopers and offers to teach him some bedroom stunts. Suddenly, Louise barges in on them, making Saito hop off the bed and claim he's gathering information. However, she crushes his nuts and is dragging him out of the room when Jessica asks how she's doing at work. Louise then angrily says she has to deal with Saito first. When Jessica says she might not get any tip or win the tip race, she tells her to watch her do it. On the last day of the tip race, while Louise worries she might lose, an ugly fatso named Turen walks into the inn, accompanied by soldiers, and comments on how well business is going. Quickly, Scarin explains that it's not always like that and adds that the seats are filled. Just then, Turen snaps his fingers and empties the bar in seconds. Meanwhile, Jessica explains to Saito that he's a revenue agent who taxes them heavily when they disobey him. Just then, Louise serves him, hoping to get a tip, but Turen checks her out and asks why a guy is serving him. After making fun of her flat frontiers, he reaches out to measure them with his hands, but Louise smacks some sense into him, making everyone freak out. Immediately, Turen orders his men to arrest her, but Saito tries to defend her, and realizes his sword is in the attic. So, Louise blasts him with a spell, surprising Turen to find out that she's an aristocrat. Despite this, Turen says she must be a ruined aristocrat, but she takes out the letter from the queen to debunk this. So, Turen and his men take out bags of coins to bribe them to forget about the situation. After the men vanish, Scarin announces Louise as the winner of the tip race. Meanwhile, back at the academy, someone breaks Long out of jail. The next day, Louise and Saito ride back to the academy, and she complains about him touching her sweet spots. Saito then tells her to chill out, since it's all flat anyway, and points out that the school seems quiet. Annoyed, Louise knocks him off and says that most people have gone home for summer vacation. Just then, she finds Tabitha and Kerche preparing to leave, and Kerche says she thought Louis had gone home, and in response, Louis says she was away on business. When Saito catches up, Kerche welcomes him with her plushies while Louise watches them with disdain. After this, Kerche announces that she'll be visiting Tabitha's home, so they get on the carriage and ride out. When Saito wishes them a safe trip, Louis stomps him in the face. Meanwhile, on the carriage, Kerche tries to talk to Tabitha, but she's buried in her book, so Kerche narrates how she got kicked out of school for being a sausage jockey. This got her parents disappointed, so they almost forced her into a marriage to avoid further disgrace. Suddenly, the carriage stops, so a farmer informs them that a lake ahead is flooded and advises them to take a road higher up. Back at the academy, Louise makes Saito do the laundry and threatens to starve him if he's slow. As he steps out, she wonders why she's so triggered by him and freaks out. Meanwhile, Saito spots Guiche and Mont arguing outside, so Mont walks out on Guiche and is surprised to see Saito. So she asks if Louise hasn't gone home. When Saito confirms this, she heads into the dorm while Guiche runs after her. Suddenly, Saito spots a big pot in a corner and talks to Marto, who then says he was planning to discard it and asks Saito to take it if he wants. Meanwhile, Kerche checks out the flooded village from the carriage and asks Tabitha how far her house is. In response, Tabitha says it's very close, and just then, Kerche spots a familiar symbol and identifies it as the seal of Gallia's royal family. So she figures out that Tabitha must be from the royal family. Shortly after, they arrive at Tabitha's home and are welcomed by Perserin, a butler, who addresses Tabitha as Charlotte. On entering the mansion, Kerche says she'd like to greet Tabitha's father, but Tabitha tells her to sit her itchy butt down. While Kerche drools over Tabitha's dad's pictures, Perserin serves her a cup of tea and introduces himself. When he says he didn't realize that Charlotte was coming with a friend, Kerche asks if Charlotte is her real name. After Kerche says that Tabitha never says anything about herself, Perserin reveals that her uncle, who's the king, ordered her to go study abroad. After this, Perserin narrates how Tabitha's father was murdered during a fight for succession with his brother, Joseph. Afterwards, those who made Joseph king tried to eliminate Tabitha by poisoning her. But her mom took the drink instead and lost her mind. He then explains that Tabitha is the name of a doll Charlotte's mom gifted her with, and adds that Charlotte changed afterwards and became withdrawn. Afterwards, Tabitha got sent on impossible missions, but somehow she made it through. Curious, Kerche asks why she was sent to the academy, and Perserin explains that since they couldn't eliminate her, they awarded her the title of Chevalier and kicked her out of the country. Just then, Tabitha returns, and Kerche says she'd like to take a shower. Back at the academy, while Mont mixes some potions together in a lab, Saito enjoys a warm bath outside and submerges himself. Just then, Siesta passes by and decides to check out what's cooking, so she peeks into the pot and Saito startles her. On realizing that she can see his sausage, he gets back in the water, while Siesta laments about her soaked clothes. When Saito peeks out of the bath, she asks what he's up to, and Saito says he's taking a bath. Hearing this, Siesta takes off her clothes to join him, making him freak out. Just then, Siesta assures him that no one will see them since it's dark. Saito then says he's more worried since he's a guy, but Siesta says nothing will happen, since he's just like a brother to her. Somewhere nearby, Mont waits for Guiche while checking out the love potion she made. Just then, Geese shows up, startling her. At the same time, Siesta tells Saito not to be embarrassed, so he turns to look at her, and they chat about his previous world. Meanwhile, Geese tries his legendary pickup lines on Mont, but Mont isn't moved, since she knows that he's a Casanova. Just when Geese tries to kiss her, she suggests they make a toast, and when she tries to put the potion in his cup, they spot Louise heading out of the dorm. Since Saito is taking too long, she angrily looks around for him and ends up finding him laughing with Siesta in the bath. Shocked, Louise runs away while Siesta reveals that Saito's story sounds like her grandfather's. Curious, Saito asks about him, and Siesta reveals that although he died before she was born, she was told that her grandfather came from another world and fell from the sky. Just when Saito gets intrigued, Siesta bids him farewell and gets dressed. After dropping a final compliment, Siesta hurries off. Meanwhile, Louise angrily rants on her way and wonders why she ran away like that. Nearby, Mont tricks Geese and makes him look away while she spikes his drink. Suddenly, Louise shows up, snatches Geese's drink, and drinks up, making Mont exclaim. On returning to the dorm, Louise comments on how good Saito must be feeling, and when he asks what she's talking about, her face suddenly turns red, so he asks if she's alright. Just then, Louise starts swooning over him and complaining that he left her for another girl. When she hugs him and confesses her love for him, Saito thinks it's a prank. Mont then peeks through the door and says she saw it coming. Back at Tabitha's home, Kerche stays up at night, thinking of the moment. Percerin handed Tabitha an order from the king and asks when she'll carry out the mission. Tabitha had said she'll carry it out the following night, so she decides to go with her. Just then, she hears Tabitha talking about her mother in her sleep and cuddles her to make her feel better. The next day at the academy, Louise gets so clingy and suspects him of going out to hang out with Siesta again, but he assures her that he isn't and says he'll be back soon, so she gives him the look of a smitten lover and hugs him, making Saito realize that she has finally gone crazy. Later that day, Mont confesses that she spiked Geese's drink, and Louise drank it by accident. Upon hearing this, Geese asks if the potion was meant for him, and says he'd never cheat on her. He then tries to kiss her, but Saito interrupts them and asks Mont to return Louise to the way she was. In response, Mont says the spell will go away eventually, so Saito asks when, and she says it could take months or years. Later, while Louise clings to Saito, Siesta shows up, so Louise starts throwing a tantrum, while Siesta stands there shivering at the sight. Saito then tries to explain what's going on to Siesta, but she leaves before he can. So, Louise starts nagging him about loving Siesta and eventually runs off. Afterwards, Saito finds Siesta doing the laundry and explains that Louise drank a love potion by mistake and has been acting weird since then. But Siesta doesn't believe him. So she says that everyone knows that using love potions is against the law. After she walks out on him, Saito heads back to the dorm and finds Louise lying on the bed and dressed for some action. Shocked, he tells her to get dressed, but she refuses and complains that Saito keeps getting on with other girls because she's not appealing enough. When she asks why he doesn't make any move even when they share a room, Saito asks if she expects him to do something. Just then, Louise says she can close her eyes while he glazes her buns, but Saito freaks out and tries to get her dressed. When she drags him into the bed with her, Saito blames the love potion. However, Louise says that he makes her heart race and places his hand on her chest, shocking Saito, who then falls off the bed. When she worries about him, Saito hugs her and vows to restore her factory settings. Afterwards, while Geech and Mont talk, Saito barges in and commands Mont to undo the potion magic. When Mont says she doesn't have the required ingredients, Saito reminds her that making love potions is forbidden by law. When he threatens to report to Osman, Mont agrees to get the ingredients, so Saito suggests they leave the next day. When Geech asks where they're headed, Mont says it's the Lagdorian lake where the spirit of water can be found. Later at night, Louise tries to put a hickey on him, but he tells her to go to sleep since they're heading out early the next day. In the morning, they all ride out to the border of Gallia, and when they get close to the lake, Geech gets thrown into the water. Just then, Mont comments that it's weird that the lake water flooded out so far. So, Saito asks if the water spirit is there, but Mont says that the spirit must be mad since the water level is abnormally high. She then suggests they wait till the spirit appears at sunset. Some hours later, Mont puts some of her blood on her familiar and sends it to find the water spirit. After the frog jumps into the lake, Mont reveals that she once visited the lake with her father and made a contract with the spirit. Saito then asks if they'll need to tell a sad story to move the spirit to tears, but Mont explains that all they need is a part of the spirit's body. Suddenly, the water spirit emerges, so Mont introduces herself and reminds the spirit of their contract. In response, the water spirit says it remembers her, so Mont asks the water to share a part of it with her, but the spirit refuses. Just then, Saito interferes and gets on his knees, offering to do anything to get the tears. The spirit then agrees, and says she's too busy raising the water level to deal with assailants. When they ask what she means, the spirit explains that some humans are causing harm to her and asks them to eradicate them. Without thinking, Saito takes the deal, surprising Mont, who then says she's not interested in the fight. However, Saito pulls his blackmail card and she agrees to go with him. Afterwards, while they hide in the trees expecting the assailants, some hooded mages show up and start casting spells on the lake. So Saito tells Louise to stay out and walks off while Geich promises Mont that she's safe with him. She then shuts him up and tells him to get moving and take down the assailants. Just when Saito tries to charge at the assailants, Geich stops him and says that they're trained mages. He then suggests that he distract them with his magic while Saito launches a surprise attack on them. On hearing this, Saito says he's trying to play it safe, but Geich says it's the best tactic. Suddenly, Geich attacks the assailants with an earth spell, but they dispel the attacks, surprising him. So Saito charges towards the assailants with his sword, but they attack him using fire and water spells, so he falls. Just when the assailants approach Saito to finish him off, Louise attacks them and tells them to back off. Then, the wind blows open the assailants' hoods, and it turns out it's Kerche and Tabitha. Surprised, they realize it's Saito and their other friends from the school. After explaining the situation to Kerche and Tabitha, Kerche asks Mont why she made a love potion. And just when Geich tries to speak, Mont shuts him up and says she was just experimenting. So Kerche points out that Tabitha will be in trouble if they don't defeat the water spirit as ordered by her family. Just then, Saito suggests that they ask the water spirit why it's mad. So Mont summons the spirit again, and when she appears, Saito asks her why she's angry. In response, the spirit reveals that a human stole a treasure from her. And since she can only exist in water, she plans to cover the world with water till she finds the treasure. Hearing this, Saito offers to find the treasure, surprising the others, who then caution him. But he proceeds to ask the spirit about the treasure, and she reveals that it's a ring. After this, Kerche asks the spirit about the human who stole the ring, and she says his name is Cromwell. When Saito promises to get the ring back to her, Geich tells him to chill out, since the spirit won't believe him when he's not even a mage. However, the spirit says she trusts him and gives them a vial containing the tears. After this, she adds that Gandalf once fulfilled his promise to her and can do it again. While wondering who's Gandalf, Saito asks the spirit to reduce the water level. The next day, when Louise recovers, she throws a tantrum, complaining about everything she did when she lost her mind. While she transfers her aggression to him, Henrietta arrives through the window. Surprised, Louise asks why she's there at an odd hour, and Henrietta reveals that she has decided to marry into Germania, surprising Louise, who then says it's a savage country. In response, Henrietta says it's important to protect the Mall country, while Saito comments that she's having a political marriage. However, Louise suddenly shuts him up and speaks of how sad it is. Henrietta then reveals that she needs to find a letter that she sent to Wales, a prince of the Albion Kingdom, and adds that if the contents were publicly read, her marriage proposal would be cancelled. When Saito wonders what the letter contains, Louise steps on him and asks him to keep shut. Just when Henrietta reveals that Albion has an unstable government and is in turmoil, Louise adds that she heard that the aristocrats are starting a rebellion. So, Henrietta apologizes for asking them for such a favor, and Louise quickly bows to her, thanking her for honoring her with such an important mission. Just then, Geich enters the room and says he overheard everything, while Louise accuses him of eavesdropping. Geich then asks the princess to assign the mission to him, and she agrees to let him tag along. Sometime later, while doing the laundry, Saito complains about Geich being included in the mission. Just then, Siesta shows up and apologizes for not believing his claims about the love potion. In response, Saito says it's fine, since Louise is better and suddenly recalls what the spirit said about Gandalf. So he asks Siesta if there's anyone with knowledge of history at the school. Shortly after, Saito meets up with Colbert in a lab where he experiments and explains that Gandalf is the familiar of a legendary mage who uses the element of void. However, he states that the existence of void magic is yet to be confirmed and reveals that Saito's runes look similar to Gandalf's. Despite this, Colbert says that there's no way to prove that he's Gandalf, since void mages don't exist. After this, Saito asks Connor what he's working on, and he reveals that he's trying to duplicate the blood of some dragons that fell from the sky some time ago in their world, but Saito thinks the blood smells familiar. Later, Louise explains that Wales and Henrietta are cousins, and she starts doubting her ability to carry out the mission since her magic sucks. So, Saito grabs her and tries to encourage her, but she gets into bed, so he says that he'll protect her. Later, when they set out for the mission, Louise checks out a ring and recalls the moment Henrietta gave it to her, and offers to get a guard to guide them. While they wait for the guard, Geich Familiar emerges from the ground and jumps on Louise. Just then, Geich says that it is attracted to expensive jewelry, and while Louise struggles to break free, the mole gets hit by some earth magic. Suddenly, a dude arrives riding a griffin, and when Guiche asks who he is, the guy introduces himself as Wardes, the guard. Immediately, they recognize him, so he approaches Louise and says he thought his fiancée was under attack. Hearing this, Saito and Guiche freak out while Ward sweeps her off her feet. Watching this from her window, Kirche wonders who the handsome bloke is and gets mad on seeing Louise in his arms. Some moments later, on their way, Guiche comments about how thrilling it felt to be protected by the captain of the Griffin unit. When Louise says she didn't expect Wards, he explains that he volunteered to help, since the Griffin unit can't be used for his secret mission. When Wards insinuates that he's doing it for Louise, Saito gets jealous. When they arrive at a port, Wards suggests they spend the night and continue the next day. While Saito refuses to speak to Wards, Louise tells him to show some respect, but Wards says he's not bossy. After Wards leaves, Louise tries to explain that her parents chose Wards as her fiancé, but when Saito says he's arrogant like every other aristocrat, Louise reveals that she adored him from childhood because he became the captain of the Mage Knights through hard work. After this, she says that Saito is nothing like Wards, making Saito regret following her on the mission. After Louise leaves, Dell asks Saito if he has fallen for her, but Saito says he hasn't. So Dell asks why he's depressed, and he says that it's because his offer to protect Louise means nothing to her. In an inn somewhere, Wardes commends Louise on summoning a human as her familiar, and when he notices Saito sulking, he says he heard about his duel with Guiche, and also mentions how he caught Fouquet. He then requests to spar with him since their ship leaves the next day, and they have time. Saito then accepts the challenge, while Louise tries to discourage them. Afterwards, Wardes grabs Louise and suggests they head to their room, but Louise says they're not married yet. Louis then reminds her that they're engaged and whispers that he has something to tell her. Unknown to them, Long is also at the bar drinking, so when they head to their rooms, Guiche says he's going bag himself a bunny. Saito then asks Dell about Gandalf, and the sword identifies him as Gandalf while saying he can only be used by Gandalf. Meanwhile, Wardes and Luz reminisce about old times over wine, and Wardes suggests that they get married after the mission. Back in Saito's room, he says that they bought the sword by chance, but Dell disagrees, saying that there are no coincidences. In addition to this, Dell reveals that his ability to manipulate weapons only works with real weapons, unlike the fake dazzling sword made for decoration. Saito then asks Dell if he could beat Wardes by using it, but Dell says it depends on him. In the other room, Wardes talks about his dreams of becoming an influential aristocrat, while Louise worries that it's too early to get married. So Wardes draws her lips closer and promises to always protect her, but this reminds her of Saito, so she mentions his name. Feeling betrayed, Wardes backs off while Louis tries to explain, so he leaves to get another room. Meanwhile, Guiche gets slapped for trying to kiss his new catch and heads back while Long and Cromwell watch. Some moments later, Wardes and Saito prepare to duel, while Louis commands Saito to back down. However, Sate draws his sword and prepares to fight, so he attacks, but Wardes evades his attacks and comments that he's fast. Ignoring this, Saito attacks again, but Warden blocks his attack and says he's an amateur. Suddenly, Wardes attacks and hits Saito with a lightning spell while saying that he can't protect Louise with his skills. In the morning, Saito watches the sun rise with a broken, and Louise shows up. Seeing him crying, she tells him not to feel bad since many girls at the academy want his sausage, but Saito yells at her, so she says she'll marry Wardes and leaves. Afterwards, Guy shows up to tell Saito that it's time to leave, but Long's golem suddenly appears while she stands on it and laughs. Somewhere else, while Wardes prepares to leave with Louise, she asks about Saito and Guiche, but he says they're returning home. When she asks him why, Wardes says they didn't tell him why, and while Louis recalls the way Saito shut her up, Wardes says they can complete the mission without them. After this, they ride the griffin and head towards the pier. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Saito asks Long why she's there, and she attacks them with a golem. Suddenly, Saito cuts down the golem's arm, but Long makes it grow another. Just then, Guiche summons an army of golems to attack the huge golem. At the same time, Louise has boarded the ship with Wardes, so she asks him about the situation in Albion. In response, Wardes explains that the royalty is at risk, since the aristocrats led the country into a civil war and have taken over most of the country. In addition, he reveals that Wales is the last blood relation to the royal family and assures Louise that he'll protect her. This reminds her of Saito again, but this time, she figures he's just a liar. Unknown to her, Saito and Guiche fight for their lives against Long's golem, which then approaches them. Suddenly, the golem gets hit by an attack from Kirche, who then arrives with Tabitha on her sylphid. After their brief reunion, a crowd arrives on the scene to see what's going on. So, Long says it's good enough that she stalled them and escaped. While Saito wonders what that means, Kirche asks about the handsome bearded dude, and they suddenly hear the sound of the departure signal. Saito then heads to the inn to ask about Louise and Wardes, but the innkeeper says they left together, claiming their other companions were heading back to school. He then rushes out and asks Guiche about the location of the pier, but Guiche says it's too late. Just then, a ship flies over them, and he says it's the ship they're supposed to get on. Meanwhile, on the ship, Louise looks out the window, thinking about Saito's, so Ward says she must have fallen for Saito and assures her that he'll protect her. At that moment, Louise thinks of Saito yelling at her and accepts Ward's marriage proposal. Back at the pier, Guiche asks Saito why they got left behind, and he points out that Long mentioned that she was stalling them. Hearing this, Guiche figures that Long might be working with Wards, but Saito says they can't be sure yet and adds that Louise is in trouble. Afterwards, Kerche joins them and announces that the next ship will leave in the morning. Suddenly, Guiche's familiar pops out of the ground beside him. Meanwhile, on the ship, Wardes raises a toast to Louise and asks her about Wales's location. In response, Louise says she promised Henrietta to keep it secret till they arrive at Albion. So, Wardes says it's fine and tells her to get some rest while she convinces herself that she made the right choice. Afterwards, they arrive at Albion, and shortly after, Wardes and Louise arrive at a church. On entering inside, they realize it's empty, but Louise suddenly flinches on spotting some soldiers stepping out of the shadows. Just then, Wardes introduces Louise as the diplomatic ambassador from Tristane and adds that they wish to see Wales. Ignoring this, the leader of the Knights points his sword at Wardes, claiming he's lying since no one knows their location. Just then, Louise steps forward, saying that Henrietta told her, and asks about Wales. Just then, the knight spots the ring on her and removes his glove to show her a similar ring. He then tells her to stretch her arm, and when she does, both rings emit light, and the knight explains that the rings were passed down through their royal families. After this, the knight takes off his mask, and it turns out to be Wales himself. A few moments later, Louise delivers a letter from Henrietta to Wales, and on opening it, he reveals that the war isn't just between the royal family and aristocrats. After this, he tells her about Reconquista, an organization behind the Civil War, which manipulated the aristocrats. He then says that he figures out who they are and tells Louise to inform Henrietta that he'll protect Albion even if it costs his life. When she steps out with a letter, Wardes asks if their mission is complete and says he'd like to ask Wales to witness their wedding, but she says it's too sudden. Just then, Wardes wraps his arms around her and says that the Reconquista needs her. On hearing this, Louise freezes, while Wardes tells her to listen to him. Just then, Louise breaks free and runs away, saying she can't marry him. Suddenly, she bumps into Cromwell, who then hypnotizes her, calling her the descendant of the Void. Afterwards, Wales conducts the wedding in a church, and while he reads the vows, Louise wonders what's going on. Just when she realizes she's being controlled, Saito barges into the church and screams Louise's name. This snaps her out of the spell, surprising Wardes, who then ask how he found them. In response, Saito explains that Guiche's familiar led them to their location using the scent of the ring on Louise, since it never forgets the scent of jewelry it has smelled before. Just then, Saito says he'll take Louis back while Wales orders the knights to arrest him. When Louise tries to explain what's going on, Wardes pushes her away and stabs Wales. When he falls to the ground, Wales hands over his ring to Louise, who then screams. Facing Wardes, Saito threatens to make him pay, but Wardes blows him away with a magic attack. He then points his rod at Saito's face while blaming Long for failing to end him as ordered. At this point, Saito confirms that Long is his ally, while Wardes tells Louis to rule the world together with him. However, when she refuses, Saito grabs Wardes' rod, and his rune suddenly glows. Seeing this, Wardes backs off from him, and Saito grabs his sword, which suddenly transforms into a new one. Suddenly, Wardes attacks Saito, but his sword absorbs the magic, so he leaps high and cuts through Wardes' attack, leaving him injured. Just then, Wardes shows them the letter he stole from Louise and strikes the floor with his rod. Suddenly, the building starts crumbling as Wardes escapes, leaving them to die. Luckily, Kerche and Tabitha arrive and lift them out of the wreck. While they fly on the Sylphid, Saito notices Louise crying, so he kisses her. When she returns to Tristane, Louise delivers Wales' ring to Henrietta and blames herself for his death and for losing the letter. However, Henrietta hugs her and thanks her for bringing her the ring. Back at the academy, Colbert seeks Osmond's permission to go further with his research on dragons, and just then, Louise arrives to give her report. So, Osmond tells Colbert to go ahead and asks how long it'll take. In response, Colbert says he's headed to a village called Taub and will be back by the day of the solar eclipse. After Colbert leaves, Louise asks Osmond if he's going on a vacation, but Osmond says he's searching for legendary dragons from the past. Moments later, Louise gives her report, and Osmond commends her for the good work. She then asks Osmond about the descendant of the Void, and he explains that Void is a lost element that has now become a legend. Louise then marvels at this, so Osmond asks if Gandalf is back, too, but she has no idea who that is. Later at her dorm, while dressing up, Louise wonders if Saito is really a legendary familiar. Just then, Saito enters with some clothes and spots her in her mini rice cakes packed in a tiny wrapper, so she explains that she had to change out of her dirty clothes. On seeing more dirty clothes, Saito freaks out, and Louise threatens to starve him if he complains. She then wonders how he could act normally after kissing her. Suddenly, her unmentionable slipped down her legs, making her freak out. Later, when she checks it out, she realizes that the band snapped and asks Saito how that happened. Just then, Saito figures he must have stretched it too much while washing it. So, Louise takes out her whip while he explains that it wasn't deliberate. Somehow, this leads to an argument, and Louise tells him to get lost, and as he heads out, she slams a pillow in his face. Shortly after, Saito takes out his anger on his bath and wonders why he kissed the monster. Just then, Siesta shows up, all packed up, and when they sit to talk, she reveals that she's going home on vacation. Saito then remembers she once told him about her great-grandfather from another world, so he asks her to tell him about him. Meanwhile, Kerche, Tabitha, and Gish spot Saito talking to Siesta. Thinking they're flirting, Kerche approaches them and suddenly hears them talking about dragons, so she halts while Siesta explains that one dragon disappeared into the solar eclipse, while the one her great-grandfather rode fell. Hearing this, Saito remembers Colbert's experiment and realizes that their stories add up. So he asks Siesta about the dragon, and she says it's being kept in her village as an heirloom. Suddenly, he asks her to take him to her village, while Kerche and the others eavesdrop from some bushes nearby. Some moments later, Louise can't stop thinking about Saito, so while she rehearses an apology, she spots Saito riding out on a horse with Siesta. Afterwards, she visits Marteau to ask about Siesta, and Marteau reveals that she just left for the village of Taub on vacation. Hearing this, Louise starts fuming and regretting the kiss, but she suddenly realizes that the village name sounds familiar. When Saito and Siesta arrive at the village, she offers to introduce him to her parents, but Saito says it might lead to misunderstanding. So, Siesta leaves to find out the location of the dragon while Saito and Del talk about Siesta being a wife material. A few moments later, Siesta shows Saito a map showing where the dragon is and explains that her great-grandfather flew on it from his world. Suddenly, Kerche shows up with her salamander, shocking them, while Tabitha flies above them. When Geach Familiar emerges from the ground, Saito looks around and finds Geach there too, so he asks what they're doing there, and Kerche says they're there for the treasure too. Shortly after, they all pass through a cave and realize they're not alone in the cave. Suddenly, someone casts a spell and warns them to leave. But just as Saito goes for his sword, Colbert steps out of the dark with Louise. After this, he explains that he discovered the location of the dragon's remnant and plans to excavate it. In response, Kerche says they're there for the same purpose. After they explain everything to Colbert, he gets excited to know that Siesta has blood from another world. Meanwhile, Louise tells Saito that she didn't follow him, and while they argue, Del informs them that while they're having a lover's squabble, the others are leaving. So they join the others, and shortly after, they arrive in a forest, following Colbert to locate the treasure. Just then, they discover a huge storehouse, but realize that it's locked. While Colbert unlocks it with magic, Tabitha finds a gravestone with some weird inscriptions, but when Saito checks it out, he realizes it's Japanese. Afterwards, they entered the storehouse, and Saito couldn't believe his eyes when he realized the dragon was a Japanese airplane. When he touches the plane, his runes glow while the others check it out and wonder what it is. Saito then reveals that he's from the same world as Siesta's great-grandfather. Just then, Colbert points out that Saito might be able to return to his world and explains that two dragons appeared during the solar eclipse, but only one disappeared. Hearing this, Siesta chips in that her great-grandfather flew in circles after the first plane disappeared, before eventually landing. Colbert then guesses that the pilot's timing was off, and he couldn't return because the eclipse was over. He then guesses that Saito might return to his world if he flies towards the eclipse. Back in Tristane, Henrietta's mother, Marion, notifies her that her marriage proposal from Germania has been cancelled. When Henrietta offers herself to be punished, Marion says she has suffered enough and hugs her. Suddenly, a messenger arrives and notifies them of an emergency. Meanwhile, at the academy, Osmond commends Colbert on his discovery, while Colbert thanks him for helping him transport the plane to the academy. Saito, on the other hand, thinks of how to get fuel and suddenly recalls the dragon blood in Colbert's lab. So he informs Colbert that they might make the plane move if he could replicate the fuel. After this, Saito gets on the plane and wonders how he knows every part of it. Del reminds him that he could use any weapon and states that the plane is a weapon of war. While Louis sulks because Saito might return to his world, Geach arrives on a horse and announces that Albion has been renamed Reconquista and has declared war on Tristan. Meanwhile, in Reconquista, Cromwell comments on the power of the ring he stole from the water spirit and declares the start of his invasion. Back at the academy, While Louise thinks about the war, Saito shows up and tells her he might return to his world in 3 days' time when the eclipse happens. Lou then pretends to be unbothered and says she's happy for him, so Saito angrily takes his leave. Afterwards, in a meeting with some aristocrats, Henrietta declares that they won't surrender and decides to lead the army in the war. Meanwhile, at the dorm, Dell asks Saito if he's attached, and Saito says he can't be attached to Louise. However, Dell says he's talking about the world, so Saito crashes out and tries to sleep. At the academy, Osmond announces that Henrietta will be leading them all to war and announces that the academy is closed. While some students decide to go home, Guiche asks if there's no one willing to fight for their country. Impressed, Mon asks if he'll be joining the army, and Guiche says he has no choice, since his father is a marshal. Just then, Louise leaves the gathering and heads back to the dorm, where she finds Saito sleeping. So she touches him and bids him farewell. The next day, Saito finds a letter beside him and asks Dell to read it. He then realizes that Louise fired him and told him to go wherever he wants. Later, when Saito shows the letter to Kerche, she says that Louise probably went to be with Henrietta and tells Saito about the war. Meanwhile, Louise meets Henrietta and offers to fight by her side. Somewhere else, Saito asks Dell what he'd do when he jumps worlds, and Dell says he'll hang out at a pawn shop as usual. So he thinks of all his good, bad, and ugly experiences with Louise. At the village of Talb, while Siesta works on a farm with other people, a floating ship suddenly arrives above their village and, on the ship, Cromwell orders his men to destroy their enemies. Later, Saito checks out the plane and wonders if he can fly it, and just then, his room glows. So Kerche says that he might never see Louise again, and while they talk, Colbert arrives with some gallons of fuel he made overnight. When Saito thanks Colbert for this, Colbert reveals that the enemies have invaded Talb and adds that the forces are marching there. So Saito gets on the plane and asks Colbert to spin the fan for him. So, Colbert casts the spell, and the plane comes alive. However, after moving the plane, Saito realizes he doesn't have enough runway to take off. Luckily, Tabitha lifts the plane with a spell, and he starts flying. She then summons her Sylphid to support Saito. At the village of Talb, Henrietta commands her Griffith riders to attack, but the dragon riders of Reconquista burn them down while the ship shoots down the horse riders. Just then, the eclipse starts, and Saito shows up flying the plane, while everyone marvels at this. Suddenly, Saito flips the plane and makes it rain fire on the dragons. Seeing this, Long and Wards spot Saito flying the plane, so they swing into action. When Saito shoots down the last fire dragon, Wards shows up flying a wind dragon and attacks from the rear with his wand. However, Saito blocks the attack with his sword and maneuvers the plane to get behind Wards, but when he tries to shoot, he realizes he's out of ammo. Meanwhile, Long destroys the ground forces with her golem, making Guiche run for his life. Suddenly, Tabitha lands her Sylphid in his way, scaring him to bits. Just then, Long approaches them to get her revenge, and Tabitha stops Guiche from running. So Kerche calls Long an old woman, annoying her, so when she tries to attack, Guiche casts a spell that splashes a paste of petals on the golem. He then turns the paste into oil using alchemy, and Kerche burns the golem to ashes, making Long hop off and run away with her burning clothes. Suddenly, Louise arrives on the scene and watches Saito's plane take a hit from Wards. Quickly, the ladies hit Wards' dragon with a spell and flew on the Sylphid above Saito. Seeing the plane below, Louise jumps off the Sylphid, so Tabitha helps her get on the plane using her magic. Suddenly, Wards approaches the plane, threatening to end Saito's legend, but Saito draws his sword, vowing to protect Louise. While she tears up, Saito's runes suddenly float off his hand and enter Louise's eyes. Dell states that Louise is not in her Void Mage mode, so she gets up, and the plane takes multiple hits from Wards. However, Louise suddenly casts a Void spell, which obliterates Wards and the ship. Afterwards, Saito crash lands with Louise passed out, and he realizes that the eclipse is over. Somewhere else, Kerche and Tabitha run into Cromwell, who then subdues them with the ring. Luckily, Guiche knocks the fight out of him and announces that Long escaped. Meanwhile, Louis awakens and tells Saito that he's fired, but he says he can't read, so she kisses him. Which of the Academy's girls would you have chosen if you were Saito? Let's know your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more videos like these, like and subscribe to the channel.